Lotto Soudal and Israel Premier Tech will be relegated. They will be pro Conti teams next year if they continue.
How did those teams get here? We know a Lotto Soudal had some signings in the past, like Gilbert, a Degenkolb, and maybe their race planning wasn't perfect. But how do you see the reason that a Lotto Soudal, the Belgian team that was one of the bigger teams back in the day, with Gilbert in 2011, with Ket Evans back in the day, like, how did they get here across the last 3 years? What went wrong?
They simply just didn't go to enough of the non-World Tour one-day races in 2020 and 2021. If you don't know, we've mentioned it here and there throughout the year, a Tour de France stage gives you 120 points. Winning a 1-1 one-day race, which none of us watch, frankly. Like, they might not even be televised. Some of them are on Facebook streams. Some of them are not even televised. There's no requirement for them to be televised. That gives you 125 points. And there's loads of them winning a 2.1 GC, like
Croatia?
Asturias. Antalya, Asturias. Asturias is 3 days, 125 points. Dot Pro's 200 for the one day or GC, whereas World Tour GC pays well, but winning a stage of Catalonia ain't worth shit in terms of points. You're better off getting sixth at GC at Tour of Turkey. Is the main. That's how the points allocation works.
I agree that the way their race setup was, the calendar that they did across the last 3 years when it comes to riding those smaller races, I agree that is one of the bigger issues as well when it comes to Lotus Soudal. But I think it's also just a mix of different factors. Now, like the Degenkolb and Gilbert signing have been pointed at as the reason for this quite a numerous amount of times. I think there's some truth in that. I think both Gilbert and Degenkolb didn't offer Lotto what they initially searched in those two riders to do. Yes, sure, they could have sent them to more smaller races and get the points there instead of trying to hit the hay at the biggest racers, which didn't really end up working out perfectly at all. And that's a factor in that. Gilbert and Degenkolb didn't get the points they needed for the team, but also next to that, the investments that Lotto made in those two riders, they're not cheap riders. We're talking about 6 figures for these riders and 7 figures perhaps with Gilbert. I'm not certain about that one, but that's a lot of money that could have gone to building a sustainable team. And with the money of Gilbert, you can get 3 riders that could be those pro team kind of sprinters that could get a lot of points. So I think the Degenkolb is the other one. I think Degenkolb is the one where I've got the most issues with.
I think I agree with you in principle, but I disagree on one important point, and I'll leave that as a cliffhanger in a second to mention our show partners, Zwift, who have brought in holo replays which challenge yourself to push to new levels. They're your ghost for previous PRs on Zwift segments. Really cool addition to the platform. People have been asking for it for a long time. I'd encourage you to go and check it out. And also let us know, like, how would you like this to be rolled out to, say, doing tests or ramp tests? Chasing like Watts targets could be an interesting thing if you're like a Watts nerd. That's another, like, it might not just be times that you want to chase. I don't know. Let us know down below what other changes like that should you like to see implemented to Zwift. But with winter coming, challenging yourself against your previous bests is something that in particular I like to see on screen as well. It really adds a lot. I disagree on Degenkolb, Benji, because I think he was perfectly capable in 2020 and 2021. John Degenkolb was as good or better than Hugo Hofstetter physically, what he could do. I just think he was sent to the wrong races. Look at 2020. Valenciana, Paris-Nice, Tour de Pologne, Tour de Wallonie, Luxembourg, Bink Bank. That's 6 stage races, and Tour de France where he, I think, crashed on stage 1. He in the one-day races he did, which 3 of them at the end of the season were all at the highest level, he top 10'd Gent-Wevelgem, Flanders, and Brugge de Panne with actually a lot of points in 2020. So that, to me, he could have had a blockbuster 2020 points-wise, or at least, like, I'm not saying don't send him to the Tour, but don't send him to Polonia, send him to something else. 2021, again, Eschborn Frankfurt, 250 points, second at World Tour level, and he's doing Valenciana, Paris, Provence, Bessèges, Swiss, Wallonie, Polonia, Deutschland. What the fuck are we doing here? That's just not understanding the system.
Yep.
John Degenkolb could have scored a lot of points, and the reason I disagree with you is because, say they get that bucket of money back, Benji, do you think they would have signed someone like Hugo Hofstetter on a third of Jed Degenkolb's salary? Because I don't think they would have.
They wouldn't have, but I think if you know the system, you would have signed those sprinters or those riders that are versatile enough sprinters to gain points in one-on-one races, multiple of those for the money that the Degenkolb is signed. So I agree that they wouldn't have done that. So it wouldn't have changed their transfer policy to make it more UCI point centered, because it seemed like they hadn't realized yet that the system was ongoing, or they realized it too late, at least in the process. And these teams, like a lot of Soudal, a lot of issues when it comes to injuries and so forth. Caleb Ewan, COVID just before Milano-San Remo probably doesn't help. Injuries throughout the entirety of the season here as well. He crashed out very earlier in the Giro. He had multiple issues towards the end of the year. I think he was out for the last part of the season, actually, for multiple races in the autumn season, the fall season of the Belgian races and whatever the races he was supposed to ride at the end of the season, and they didn't necessarily replace him towards the end of the year, that spot. That is a factor as well. But I also would say that that's a factor across many teams. So it's not that Lotto Soudal is the only team that has injuries and so forth. It just happened to a Ewan in this case, so it does happen to their better riders. And it is perhaps a team we see across the teams that were fighting for relegation as well, where bigger riders were injured. But that's also the case for the top teams, eh? Bernal at Ineos, one of their biggest riders.
That, you have to factor them in. Everyone gets shit luck. Nizzolo crashed on the Poggio descent, and he was about to come 6th or 7th in San Remo, and that took him out of other races he was about to do. And Arnaud Delis, with that, when he got body checked by Welsford, that could have been a season ender, and he got up pretty fine and continued on to score a lot of points. So everyone has swings and roundabouts with crashes and bad luck. I definitely think team culture towards the points, like, that's what's been the biggest difference here, is there are riders on the 2 relegated teams who thought for a long time they're above these races. They're too good to go and do this midweek race to sprint for points. They're too good to peak and take seriously a stage race elsewhere. Whereas Hugo Hofstetter at Arkea, whereas Simone Consoni at Cofidis, Jesus Herrada, they went professionally and consistently to all these races throughout the year, and with less top talent, let's be real, like Mike Woods, Fuglsang, Nizzolo, there is more top talent even at an Israel than Cofidis, and certainly at a Lotto, but the team culture and chemistry and professionalism, both staff and rider-wise, hurt them in the first half of the season. And then once you're scrambling, Cofidis already had, and Arkea had such a big lead. So I think that was the most important thing this year, at least.
I agree with that. Now, I do want to add, let's say you are Gilbert, you're ending your career this year and you see that your team is struggling. Are you going to be caring about the Veneto Classics at the end of the year, or are you going to finish on a race that you want to finish your career at? I'm probably going to go for the latter. At that point, I don't really care anymore. I'm going to go for a race that I want to finish my career at and skip out on Veneto Classics, for example. That might just be selfish, but I'd say, okay, well, the staff is for me the reason, the majority of the reason. As in, if they realize so late that this system, this relegation system, is so vital for the survival of some of these teams, and they work into it so late when it comes to adapting their calendar and so forth. Some teams adapting it very late even. I'd argue I'd blame the staff more than I would blame the riders. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. It's not the rider's job to read the UCI rulebook. I would say Lotto. I remember I made the video in January about they could be relegated. I would say they tried to correct course quicker than a lot of other teams. Lotto, unfortunately, I think Lotto did a pretty good job this year, actually. I think they did much better than I expected. When I say the culture, I'm referring to more the 3-year cycle and probably Caleb Ewan, because I said he should do a particular calendar at the start of the year. It still meant he could do the tour. It still meant he could do the UAE tour. It still meant he could do San Remo, and yet he's doing Saudi tour and Tour of Turkey. I think pointless races. They just put themselves in too big a hole before the start of the year, and they had a good year. It's Israel who really underperformed, and you look at the back end of this year, and the tour they won 2 stages, but they really underperformed at the back end of the year points wise. They didn't seem able to motivate their top riders, Fulsang or Woods or whoever, to score, and they miss out on World Tour by a long way.